So welcome, 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 my beloved colleague Chi, for all your leadership and your authenticity and the work that you're doing on behalf of so many. Thank you so much. And as always, we begin by acknowledging and giving thanks to our creator, to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Chi, once again, you're not new to building with us, but please introduce yourself to our listeners, to our viewers, and share about your remarkable work because you have a new role in community that I'm so excited about.
I'm so excited to be returning to the Setsi platform, this time introducing myself as the managing director of the newly established Toronto Chinatown Land Trust. My name is Chiyi Tam. My pronouns are she and her. I'm based in Toronto, in Toronto Treaty territory. But I'm from the West Coast, so constantly learning about the land, and oh my God, is it giving back? I'm so keen to get into our updates with you.
That's absolutely incredible, and congratulations once again on this remarkable new role. So, could you share a little bit about the mission and vision of this remarkable organization?
Yeah, the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust has been very carefully doing research and exploring whether or not it's appropriate for it to exist. So really, the intention isn't to make a land trust. I hope any group out there who's considering whether or not a community land trust is right for them should know that it's not always the most appropriate solution. Maybe there are other models that get you to your goal faster. But in our case, the people who were asking the question, hey, would a land trust work for Toronto's Chinatowns? Came from this anxiety of seeing and also being exhausted by a lot of very large scale development proposals that were actively posed to displace people from Chinatown and massively induce a rise in rents across the neighborhood, which primarily historically has always served new immigrants, migrant workers, really precarious status folks in a really economic inclusive way that's like quite organic. People are able to find, their first job. People are able to find their first advice in the language that's appropriate to them, often in the neighborhood. And there's such a huge diversity of different services and people and small businesses and mutual aid activities that happen in all corners of this neighborhood. And we were seeing that being pushed out by a lot of the planning and development policies that were coming down to the downtown core of Toronto broadly without considering the specific situation that is in Chinatown. So we did all that research. We've been talking constantly to community members, to organizers, neighborhood organizers from generations past for advice. And we've come to the conclusion that, it's time to move. It's time to move and build something of our own. Um, and yeah, I'm so proud of the fact that we incorporated this year on New Year's Day, Lunar New Year's Day, sometime in February.
That's incredible. That's incredible and synchronistic. Yes, I give thanks for your leadership as always, and just really inspiring folks. And that's a perfect segue to my next question. What's inspiring you most about the potential outcomes of this remarkable vision?
Um, oh, there's so much that's inspiring me. So I had worked on community land trusts before trying to apply it to my community neighborhood of Chinatown in another neighborhood in Kensington, and also working for other land trusts and supporting other people all over Turtle Island, literally talking to them and helping them with their implementation and doing collective ownership, cooperative ownership, community wealth building strategy like land trust in Chinatown has been so giving because what was before just a theory that that's what the neighborhood has always been doing has turned out to be true. We've been able to verify this. And so now we have a new theory, which is, could we prove that a critical mass of nonprofit ownership of properties and assets is what anchors a neighborhood to be economically inclusive in the long term? Could we argue that if you strategically acquire enough of the community held assets into nonprofit democratic governance, you would have a place like Chinatown persist despite how rampant the real estate growth is? So I didn't think I think the narrative has been for so long that Chinatown is disappearing, Chinatown is under threat, like all of our ethnic enclaves are under threat, little Jamaica's under threat, like little Tokyo in LA is under threat, everybody, like everybody and everybody's mom's like very, very precious culturally specific grocery stores, etc., are on, like there was just this narrative of like fear and anxiety, and that like it doesn't exist the way it used to exist and all of this stuff. And I just realized that I have to be grateful for the fact that Chinatown exists now, like that you could still go right now and it does exist, and that is a success in and of itself. So how, why is it able to do that? And the answer turns out to be that the community has never needed to call what they're doing community wealth building, mutual aid, community land trust. They don't need to use these like words that we're using to describe the social economy now. They've been doing it though. The clan associations, the family associations, the Freemasons, the regional associations like the Canadian Cambodian Chinese Cambodian Association, for example, they own two properties in the core of Chinatown in the residential area. They rent to about 18 people who have aged in place as bachelors originally, migrant workers who were able to pay very, very low rents because they bought those buildings and they licensed them as legal rooming houses. And all of the people who live in that building make decisions together about the maintenance of that building and basically do participatory budgeting over their own building and their own housing. So like you can't tell me that's not a community land trust, but I'm not going to go like talk to an elder that runs that building and be like, do you know what you're doing is a community land trust? Like what's the point? It's like they've already done it. Like they're just proving to me that it works, and you just need to get going. The question I am asking them, one of our priority strategic areas is, I think you'll like this. I'm going around and asking them, do you think what you did back in the 60s, back in the 1920s, back in whenever it is that your family association bought this building, do you think we can do it now? What advice would you give me now? And the elders in the community have had really different takes on whether they think the real estate market operates the same way, whether or not the relationships in the neighborhood are still the same for us to be able to pull something like that off. You're talking about 7 guys taking out a second mortgage on their own house in order to buy a house together in Chinatown to be able to do activities. Like, come on. That's the dream. They live in the dream.
That's so inspiring and so needed right now. I think
Mhm.
a lot of times when you look at the alphabet soup of acronyms and terminologies in our sector, there's almost this assumption that thought leaders and practitioners have to speak in that jargon when engaging community. When in actuality, people have been practicing these terminologies since time immemorial in their own
Mhm.
ways. So,
Mhm.
so you framing that narrative in a way that's so clear, concise, and articulate, once again, just shows why we love you on this platform and why I'm always excited to build with you, you know? So I give thanks as always for your genuine leadership.
Next question, like I'm going to have to pay that compliment back to you because it's also literally your remarks in meetings that we've had over time with other stakeholder groups and stuff like that, where you've reflected openly about like the way that the researchers love to fetishize susus, for example. They like have this like essentialism of like talking about these very marginal community strategies in a way that benefits their like newfangled social economy publishing or whatever it is. And like it's really been connected to people like you who also have that sense, who've like allowed me to ask that question in my own community. So compliments back to you, you know.
I receive. Thank you so much for that. So my next question is, what challenges and barriers are you and your colleagues facing? And what sort of approaches, stratagems are you using to overcome some of them? And how can we help?
Oof. I would love to hear from, yeah, other like culturally specific community groups who have tried to do a thing. You know, like I want your advice. Like if your cultural association found a way to build a church to build like a women's drop-in center, to build a seniors like long-term care home. Like I want to know the story behind it in the nitty-gritty. Like I want to show you my books and walk you through our strategy. I want to hear from, especially calling out to the East Asian diaspora who feels connected to Chinatown. We're looking for stories of solidarity in past generations with Indigenous organizers. A huge part of this generation's organizing that our elders have told us is something that genuinely our generation needs to do because in the past it hasn't been as clearly articulated, is people individually had understandings of the fact that they were settling and immigrating to stolen indigenous land, but they have different understandings and relationships with that. So we need to have a strategy because we're seeing the land back movement really, really like call us into action to support their movement and also just like the formal truth and reconciliation framework to like see our place in it. And those are like two entirely different strategic streams of like, okay, if we have any existing community wealth, how can we rearrange it, come into partnership with people who are organizing towards decolonization and do something really cool, like to acknowledge the fact that, okay, Chinatown exists, that's a privilege. How can we leverage that together? So those are like the two big strategic areas. I just want advice from past generations of organizers who have tried to acquire properties or steward land in a way that's meaningful and interesting and alternative together. And then I want to call on people to offer us stories of like how they have like tried to explore solidarity in various mechanisms. Because the proposals we have on the table are really exciting and we're developing them with our friends and neighbors in Chinatown. We've seen come to life at the same time as us, the Toronto Indigenous Land Trust, and we're side by side now. But both of us are like, we need examples, we need other community members. Someone must have tried to do this before. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you think about some of the leadership, and these are servant leaders like Shannon and Naka, they bought the
Mhm.
building. Sarah McNeil and Frank Richter, or our incredible colleague Jocelyn Forsma, and Shadi
Mhm.
Hafez, the National Aboriginal National Association of Friendship Centers, or Jeff Sear and Wahi and Raven Indigenous Capital, and the work they're doing around outcomes-based financing. Like there's leaders right now with narratives that are leveraging the intellectual abundance. I hate the word intellectual property, but the intellectual abundance of their ancestors and of their elders to create unique strategies to deal with some of the pervasive challenges of the now, I think is
Mhm.
remarkable. So any way that we can help in supporting that, and as well any listeners and viewers, because we always get emails to our info at Setsi after we post, please reach out because once again, even though this isn't the call to action section of the conversation, please, like this is a call to action because we need to find ways and means to really attack systemic transformation from a very different language. It's not about moral suasion. It's not about like, because the market's the market. And as Indy Johar says, capital markets are terminating us.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
speak to
Mhm.
our colleagues at multiple philanthropic foundations, when they're trying to protect land for public use, they're being outbid 3-1 by the private sector. So this is a problem. So your work is pioneering. But like you said, there's elders that have also pioneered some of this work. So how do we build in infrastructure and frameworks around intergenerational collaboration? So for
Mhm.
sure, any way we
Mhm.
can support, we will. So my next question is, how do you feel about the future of community land trusts in Canada? Now that you, as far as I'm concerned, you're my go-to when it comes to this work. And I know a lot of folks in this space, but you think very differently. You have been one of those leaders that play more of a role of service than of ego and narcissism. You know what I mean? And I think that's the type of stewardship that we need in these times. We need leadership. We need a different type of leadership to attack these systems that are founded on colonial and competitive processes and premises.
Yeah, I think that community land trust will soon be reaching a tipping point where uh, I really wonder whether it can push us into the next world, like this world building exercise of like all this hope and optimism we put into being interested in the social economy, being interested in social inclusion. What is it for? And there is a world where the way that community land trusts are trending right now as a policy option because politicians want to be seen to be doing something about the affordable housing crisis, as they should feel pressured to do, that we give a whole bunch of capacity and uh, funding to the community land trust sector, and what we do is inadvertently just reinvent the status quo of the nonprofit housing sector's relationship to real estate, which is to say that it reforms it without transforming it. And making something slightly more tolerable and slightly less harmful over time just so it can persist is like not the radical political interest that the Chinatown project and the Indigenous community land trust at least are interested in pursuing. We're interested in seeing whether or not we can use this as a collective ownership tool to take power away from the existing real estate sector and actually just move away from the way we steward land entirely. So we want to see CLTs join us in a conversation about, and other property owners broadly that feel so-called values wise, to like talk about like, hey, let's start be like directing our property taxes towards like First Nations, towards like ownership, towards Indigenous ownership. Let's start be redirecting our budget lines and capacity in a way that like meaningfully responds to not just like the educating our own members, developing a land acknowledgement, doing all this like equity stuff of like, I'm going to reserve 20% of our units for Indigenous like neighbors to access. Like, that's all great. And you should just do that. Don't like bother Indigenous people about it. Just get going and do it. The actual transformational piece of work is like, how are we actually using the land together in a completely different way that just takes power away from the colonial system? And right now, our experiment that we're developing, we are currently developing like an actual anti-colonial strategy for the Toronto Chinatown Land Trust's like opening strategic planning. And our explorations include ideas like, which would be pushing the CLT model by a lot. Like, we understand that we're on the radical edge of CLTs themselves as well, the way you described. But basically, some of the ideas to give you a glimpse are like, can we, if we take it literally, that we mean what we say in the land acknowledgement, which is that Indigenous people steward this land, can we give them veto power over our land trusts development applications? Do we go to them first when we want to build a new garden, when we say we want to like add 3 units to the top of this store, when we say we want to actually redevelop the whole site and make a seniors long-term care home, whatever it is that the community is proposing? You know how we take it to the planning department for approval anyway? Well, like, let's treat our Indigenous neighbors and council as the actual authority the way that we say. And it would be so interesting to hold ourselves to like a super high standard. Yes, it would be a lot more work. Yes, it would be way more inconvenient, but that's the whole freaking point. So there's like ideas like that to like tangibly implement completely transformational relationships to the way we take literally the reality we live in. It's like, it's not like I'm like living in this radical reality where private property already doesn't exist and like planning and development doesn't exist. It's like, no, we're fully here. Capitalism exists. Like, what am I going to move from this particular position? That's really exciting to me. Like, that's what's ahead for us in the work, which is so different than my answer to your question to this like a year ago, you know, which is exciting. Like, God knows what I'll know in a year. So that's what's pulling us forward into the future right now.
That's beautiful. Primarily because I'm tired of the virtue signaling, the incrementalism. We don't need reform. We need revolution when it comes to these pieces. Like, housing is a human right, and then when you think about truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, like, we need solidarity in such a meaningful way. Like, I turn down panels. I refuse to participate in certain things if certain people aren't checked in with. And I think we have to be really diligent as allies and move beyond, like well beyond solidarity, to the point where we're active in saying, you know what, this is wrong, and this is why it's wrong. And until we get there, like you said, it's that incrementalism, and systems seem to almost be adapting to activism and advocacy faster than the activists are able to build the structures and the
The
infrastructure.
next strategy.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
next strategy, you know what I mean? So definitely I salute you for the work you're doing and the success, because I'm seeing the wins and I'm seeing the folks that are leaning in. And I call on everyone to we need to pressure ministers. Minister Sean Fraser's new in this. Like what is Minister Sean Fraser's mandate letters? Like
Yeah.
what's in the mandate letters? Who's reaching out and saying this is what you should be looking at? So we need to be very vigilant when it comes to truth and reconciliation with our indigenous brothers and sisters. We need to be very
Mhm.
vigilant when it comes to the land actually being like a entity, a sentient being. In Africa, we call Asasiya, Mother Earth. Like these
Mhm.
concepts are so important. They're just not airy fairy values. This is real, even though we're operating within the confines of this colonial and capitalist structure. We have to find ways to humanize this work. So once again, I applaud you for all your efforts and the great success that I'm seeing. So give
Mhm.
thanks for all that you're doing for so many.
Thank you for your leadership, like constantly connecting us together, people who are like-minded, like making such meaningful introductions, always just reaching out. Like, thank you for your leadership.
That's papa. Give thanks. Yeah, give thanks.
Mhm.
What is your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
We just had such a beautiful day-long visioning session asking ourselves that question yesterday. There are so many different themes of this. Success looks like people who are out here to profit become scared of touching Chinatown because we're so strong and we project such strength. People within the community know who we are and call on us when they're in trouble and somebody's trying to take over their property or kick them out of their house. Success looks like other groups popping up, like a tenant union that's like that would be really innovative, that is Chinatown wide instead of landlord specific. Um, or I would like to see the first unionized, Chinese restaurant in Toronto. Like I'm jealous because New York had a huge banquet hall that was unionized, and I would love to see that kind of like people strength in the neighborhood. I want us like success looks like me being an 85-year-old woman and being able to live a totally walkable, independent lifestyle the way that the seniors in Chinatown live today. Like, I'm jealous. Like, I want that for me, and I hope that it exists then. And it's just like in my mind, as an urban planning nerd, Chinatown is the pinnacle of all that like urbanism that they love to like fantasize about. Chinatown is that. And I want that for everybody else. Like I want Little Jamaica to exist so I can still travel from Chinatown to there. I want there to be like a completely new indigenous co-op up the street from me. Like I can just see it. I can see like what it's gonna smell and sound like, and like it's gonna be so fun. And that's what success looks like.
I love that optimism. And my wife has helped me with my optimism. I remember I grew up in Scarborough, East Toronto, but I was always in Regent Park with some of my brothers. And I remember
Same.
we were at the boardwalk and we would always be like, there's no way they're letting folks like us keep this view. And so said, so done, revitalization or gentrification. I mean, so like those thoughts, those sentiments, and that beautiful vision that you just shared, so said, so done. Like I feel we're on the right path, and we just
Mhm.
Maya Angelou says, nothing will work unless we do, and you're doing the work, fam. So I appreciate
Mm.
you. I appreciate you. So my last question, actually, before my last question, you're
Yeah,
having a gathering. You're having something.
yeah,
A
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
You're having a gathering, and I really want you to share a bit with our listeners and viewers.
You guys, if you're listening to this and you're curious, you've never heard of a CLT and now you're interested, or you have been interested in CLTs and that's why you're listening to this, come hang out this weekend. It's never happened before that we've had an open, public, national gathering of all the CLTs. And actually, I say national, but like, we don't believe in so-called Canada. So the it's really like Turtle Island wide. There are organizers that I've invited from Boston and Los Angeles to come up and join us to talk about CLTs. And we have CLT 101 sessions. It's basically going to be a summit. Um, it's a summit on the first day, it's an AGM on the second day. It's the first time that all of the CLT organizers across Canada, whether they own tens of thousands of units and support the Cooperative Housing Federation, or whether they have no property and are just like a group of 5 friends and neighbors who are trying so hard to make something happen, we're all going to be in the same room to just talk, make sense of the world together right now. It's never happened before. It's the inaugural one, and we hope that it'll happen every so often, every year maybe. So come. It is October 20th to 22nd. The main programming is on the 20th, the Friday, and the Saturday, the 21st. You can find information on cltsummit.ca where you can register. And if you need a discount or some kind of like economic support in order to participate, please reach out and email us as well.
Ashe, you heard it here, folks. The community land trust movement is moving. And if you want to be involved, please join the gathering, the movement that is happening in a few days. We give thanks for your leadership. My last question, do you have any calls to action or any closing thoughts or words of wisdom to folks in the community land trust movement, or just folks that are doing work in the social innovation space, social economy space, or just in the space of trying to make humanity?
I think the more I learn about land, because I get to think about land all the time, the more I realize how much of our trauma is in it. Like, I get it. If your grandma and your parents were dispossessed from the land that they knew, you're gonna still know that in your body, even if you've never been to that land. And the first instinct when you're so hurt like that is to, out of that anxiety, want to own it. And I get that because you can see that it's worked for other people. Home ownership is real housing security for your family. But I just really want all of our energy that goes into affordable home ownership and ownership in general in the private sense to evolve into the next thing, which is if we keep on focusing on these traumatized responses to housing insecurity, I don't think it'll actually deliver us to liberation, which is what we're all dreaming and co-creating constantly. My theory is it will only be in the collective ownership where we find that kind of hard fought for, constantly negotiated freedom. And yeah, I'm so inspired. I'm so inspired by seeing what folks are doing with all these alternative land mechanisms. And I so hope that next time we check in, it's just going to be totally different what we know.
Ashe. Thank you so much for all that you do and for
Mhm.
sharing and investing your time and energy and brilliance and intellectual abundance with us. And yeah, I'm just so grateful, so grateful. And we'll close this interview the way we began by acknowledging
Mhm.
the creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We also acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, fam. I so appreciate you.
Thank you.